And so when it comes to wearables, for me, the wristwatch, the wristwatch dates back to the 1600s, right? It's in many ways the original personal computing form factor.
Leor Stern, thank you for being on 20 Minute Leaders. How are you?
Good. It's my pleasure.
I am so excited to speak to you about your journey. Your LinkedIn says two-time Googler. Not many people have that. A lot of people have ex-Googler or Googler, but two-time Googler. That's, I think, something special that I want to hear about. I want to hear about your experience with the watch industry and the smart wear. How are we advancing with different devices that are in our lives, but with technology, and your journey from corporate to startup to another startup to corporate. Leor, take me through your journey. How do you get started with what you do?
Yeah. So, Google, when I first joined Google in 2003, it wasn't quite that corporate yet. There were a couple thousand people in the company, and it was still felt, and I think in retrospect, obviously was early days.
Wow, 2003. That's wow.
Yeah, yeah. And the story I tell, since we're Israeli, is I was the first Israeli at Google who was not either a software engineer or like working in HR, and so Israel was the ads business in Israel was kind of my 20% project, which
Wow.
quickly grew. And then I basically, just to give you a sense of how we did things back then, I recruited my friends who were in university to help translate text strings as we were localizing the AdWords product
Unbelievable.
into Hebrew and local currency, and then was as the business kept growing, I wasn't fucking it up, and
That's always a good thing.
yes, and so and I lobbied for a while and that Google should sort of get more serious about Israel and open an office. And so when we finally decided to do that, I was kind of first person on the ground to hire and train the team and kind of help them get set up and integrate with Google broadly. And then from there, I did a similar role, kind of building and managing a larger cluster of
What are some of the challenges
sales
that go
teams
with
for.
what are some of the challenges that go with bringing a business like ads like Google AdWords to another country? Both obviously the localization of it, but also in terms of mindset. Looking at a whole different country, a whole different like operations. What comes with what entails with that endeavor?
I think it's like with any, it's almost like moving countries, right? So it's a big logistical challenge that contains within it lots and lots of smaller problems, right? So what you do is you try to kind of break down, here's all the problems, and almost turn it into like a step-by-step kind of, okay, so first you need to establish a local tax entity, local legal entity, so that you can operate in this market.
Right.
Then if you're getting paid, again, this is before Stripe and, with every accepting foreign currency,
Yeah.
you had to have largely homegrown solutions for that. So you have to figure out how to get paid, how to establish your taxation status. It's just basically a list of problems that you cross off, right? Who's gonna run this entity? What kind of rules do we need? What does our business objective look like?
Yeah.
In the end, we had something like a 150-page presentation that was kind of the roadmap, right? Like the
Wow.
business plan for Google in this new country.
Unbelievable. Okay, wait, but then Leor, there's so much that I want to cover. So you move on to head of the business development at IFTTT. Now I've used IFTTT myself to help me automate some processes. And for whoever doesn't know, IFTTT, if this then that, it's this idea that we can create our own paths to productivity and you automate different processes, integrating different applications, right? And
Yeah, no, that's exactly right.
And so then what does that mean, leading the business development after 10 years at Google, you decide to go and, between what you just told me and when you left for IFTTT, you've done so much, obviously, and you ran business development also within Google for different jurisdictions. So, but then you transitioned to the startup life. And what was that transition like?
It was, so I left Google after 10 years and
Yeah.
joined IFT. And when I joined IFT, there were 9 people on staff. So it was still very small. It
Wow.
was, the product was well established and still doing well, and I love it. But at the time, the company was still small. And, there were things, by the time I left Google, it was much bigger. I would say that it does meet your definition of corporate here, right? So it was definitely leaving the big company life behind. It was a little bit like jumping off the ledge, right? Especially having spent professionally, I grew up at Google, right? And what I will say is overall the experience was I didn't find that I was at much of a disadvantage or that I even missed some of the big company creature comforts and perks as much as I feared I might. At the end of the day, what you have in the snack room or where you get your lunch is those things can have a cumulative effect to kind of optimize your working day, but it's not like not having these things is catastrophic. And I also found that it was professionally and creatively extremely liberating to come into a much smaller environment and basically have to tackle problems end to end and spend time thinking about how do we impact things for our users, how do we impact things for the ecosystem,
Right.
rather than how do I navigate the internal, checks and balances and all the kinds of points of friction that a big company has on the way to getting something done.
Right. And then, running business development for a small, like fast growing product, very, very, focused rather than, dealing within the business organization of Google. How does that fare? What are the different priorities that you have to keep in mind?
So I think you kind of need to dial up the hustle factor quite a bit because it's, at a startup, it really is much more existentially critical that you get things done. I think it's also hard, even for, if you have a hot brand, it can still be difficult to get mind share. And what's most difficult from big companies that you're trying to partner with, and what's most difficult is getting prospective partners or customers to trust you, right? To trust that the company will, that there's longevity,
right?
And that you're kind of a good investment of their money or time. So those are some of the bigger challenges. I think on the plus side, startups can take bigger risks. There's less kind of baggage. There's less legacy stuff to deal with. So even as something as simple as, look, I'm making a call out to Nike to suss them out about something. You don't have to. You just need to find a contact and set up time with them. You don't need to worry about like, well, are there other conversations going on with Nike,
right?
Or like, is this team working with them, right? Which by the time I left Google, what was the case, right? Like there were lots and lots
of
and lots. The breadth of activity was so vast.
Of course.
So you need to hustle more, but you can be more. There's less dissipation of effort, if that makes sense. And I think that's true. I found that to be the case as a startup CEO as well. Is you're kind of you don't have the advantages of a big platform to go with, but you also, once you focus on doing something, 99% of your effort is just doing it instead of, doing it and kind of doing your diligence or like kind of satisfying checks and balances and the kinds of things that, again, a larger public company has the responsibility to go through.
So you move from corporate to joining the leadership of an existing company, and then you decide to go full throttle on the entrepreneurship path and create a startup yourself. You end up selling that startup to Google, which is actually how you go back to Google, and that is the two-timer. But walk me through, you become passionate about something that I don't believe you've dealt with before, right? This whole like smartware and how we're interacting with technology on our bodies.
Yeah. So I in my first run, I guess at Google, I worked on a lot of emerging hardware form factors, and was involved with some mobile technologies early on. I did a lot of work on speech recognition, for instance, and location. And so when I started Chronologics, we started the company in late 2014. I'd been thinking about it for a while, but I also saw that Apple launched the Apple Watch then, and I became convinced that sort of this is where the puck was headed, right?
Okay.
That wearables were going to be a significant personal computing form factor, and this was a problem that I wanted to take apart in solving. So that's kind of how we came to work on the space. I also think, since IFT, and by virtue of IFT being a connector between different products and services, early on, I also got to spend a lot of time with wearable companies and kind of creating these integrations that allowed people to, for instance, flash my light disco theme if I meet my Fitbit step count, right? Those kinds of things. So I saw that there was a lot of interest and a lot of value for users, not necessarily in that silly example, but
it's not silly at all, I have to say.
Smart wearables.
100%. And then, but you go then to the more software side. You actually build an operating system, right, for wearables. And so you're coming in from the, like this business background and the head of business development, and you go down and you're saying, okay, well, I'm going to actually go and do like heavy software eventually to be integrated onto these wearables. Is that the traditional path for somebody coming from business development to then create a software-based startup?
I'm more familiar. So it's been done. I'm much more familiar with people starting out. For instance, getting computer science degrees or starting out in technical roles and kind of joining the dark side of going into business roles. I think that sort of, I'm a little averse to kind of labels and labeling people in their careers, and I see that a lot even as I interview people or as a hiring manager at different times. We have a tendency of thinking of someone based on the job, the last job that they've done, or the role they've done the most of. And I think we run the risk of kind of shortchanging ourselves by saying, "Oh, I'm a business guy. I can't like spec out a product or build a prototype of a UI, for a smartwatch, for instance." And my point is, you never know until you try.
Totally.
Right. So, but look, I'm not gonna BS you. I think there's limited efficiency, right? There's diminishing returns. There's a strong argument to be made for like kind of doubling down in one role.
Of course.
And I certainly, have proportionately overdeveloped, business negotiation strategy muscles relative to some of the other things that I needed to use.
That's really awesome. Okay, now I want you to talk to me about this thing. So right now we have so many people around, walking around with these things on their wrists. You've been in this space for now 6 years, and you've been thinking about this daily. And it's one of the questions that always came up between me and my friends as we're seeing this world unfold, and as we're getting introduced to this new phenomena of like our phone on our hand. Where is the world going? I mean, how do you see smartware technology integrated into society? And how, I want to play like a mind game of where you're going to see this going in the next 10 years, and what things we can be excited about or pessimistic about.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's really a source of excitement. Look, I think I'm a big believer in the notion that computing is becoming ubiquitous, right? So everything around us is becoming connected. Doesn't necessarily mean that everything's going to have a screen or a microphone or, but things are going to have sensing capabilities, inputs and outputs. And ultimately, the world around you is going to be a set of devices that kind of talk to each other. And there will hopefully be, and I think, I certainly see Google as being one of the services that can help bring all of these disparate endpoints together to unlock value for the user, right? To solve problems for the user. So I think that's true in general. I think and so we're kind of moving from a world in which you know, used to sit at a computer and then you kind of took your laptop with you, and now you've got a computer with you all the time in your pocket. Moving to this modality where like the computer is kind of just ambiently around
Totally.
you, right? Um, and so when it comes to wearables, for me, you know, the wristwatch, I mean, the wristwatch dates back to the 1600s, right? It's in many ways the original personal computing form factor. And so it's tried and true, and there's a lot of value in having something on your wrist, both as like a quick kind of glanceable device for interactions, for consuming information, and increasingly, and I think we're seeing this industry-wide with smartwatches, as a place to fit sensors that can help you understand what's going on in your body,
Totally.
and potentially even save your life. Um, so I think the and this is not, I'm not saying that the watch is going to like eat the phone. I don't think that's happening. But in a broad constellation of computing devices that you work with, the wristwatch has these three critical advantages to me. One is it works and we're comfortable with it. Two, good place for sensors. Three, good form factor for certain interactions and consuming information.
What's missing? So what's missing from my interaction with my watch right now that you think I will have in the coming years?
So I think what's missing, there's still friction, right? We haven't eliminated. So I think specifically things like battery life, you know, battery life of these devices is still quite limited. It's another thing to charge, like there's some clunkiness to that. We're still largely, I mean, I think there are kind of cellular connected options for wearables, but I think that's still a little bit the exception. You know, it's expensive. It's again, there are power implications there.
By the way, that friction that you mentioned before, do you see when, you know, I'm looking at the general consumer, when they purchase a watch, do they use it as frequently as they would of a regular watch? Or does it get to a point where, you know, they put it away, they forget about it, they stop using it, they come back to it? What's the relationship of today's consumers with wearables?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think attrition, as with any product, is key, and definitely the battery life. There's a lot of data that shows that, like, you know, once you have to take something off every so often to charge it, that dramatically, you know, that can significantly increase the chances that you're going to forget to put it back on.
Right.
You know, which intuitively makes sense.
Right.
So that's definitely a challenge that exists. But you know, in general, obviously, people do. Many people are very, very happy with their smartwatches and use them on an ongoing basis. And there's also a link of the fitness and wellness aspect of these devices, because it's, again, you can't get that from your phone, right? Or certainly not all of it, and not as easily. And so I think that kind of plays into it. I think there are other challenges with smartwatches. I think new technologies, we all had this sugar high from the smartphone revolution, which was a very rapid onset transformation, right? And then we look at things like AI, we look at things like augmented reality, you know, drones, right? Like these are technological development cycles that are taking a little bit longer to bear fruit. It doesn't mean they're not going to be monumental. It just means that we need to be patient. And I think the same is true with wearables and with the smartwatch in particular. I think we're still in this modality of kind of like developing these devices like a mini phone. And as we move away from that, we're going to see greater adoption and ultimately more value.
Very, very cool. I have to ask, you know, you left Google for a few years, and I mean, I'm extrapolating to any company that grows, you know, naturally with time. You come back a few years later, you come back to the same company, but it has to be a different company in some sense. Were you surprised by any, you know, social norms or, you know, different things that all of a sudden you're like, wow, like I did not expect to see this when I came back?
Yeah, I mean, things, again, it's hard to grok the different timelines, right? So like an organization evolves at a different pace than you know, you experience your own career. It was mostly the same. I think that there were some positive surprises. I think in general, kind of the debate style and the team dynamics have shifted and have been shifting towards, you know, being, not that it was ever like a huge problem in my first run, but more inclusive, more just nicer, more actively respectful.
Well, I
And
think
so
Google
it
is an
comes across,
exemplary.
right?
I mean, Google, I think, worldwide is known as one of the companies that are, advocately, like very openly advocating for, healthier debate and more supportive ecosystem and more inclusion. So that comes at no surprise.
Right.
But I'm sure that it has to be an interesting experience leaving a company at X, going through Y and Z, and coming back at W. And then all of a sudden, it's like you're back in the same place, but you've gone through all these incredible transformations yourself, going through leadership at a startup, creating and selling a startup yourself, and now back and working in this domain. Leor, we're almost out of time. I can't believe it, but I have to ask you the most important question. 3 words that you would use to describe yourself.
Thoughtful, critical, and helpful.
Thoughtful, critical, helpful.
Yeah, that's how I would like to describe myself.
I love it. Leor, toda rabah. Thank you very, very much. It's been a pleasure. And just as a fun fact, you just mentioned before this talk that you were one of the founders with my father and Amir and Eyal of Google Campus Tel Aviv, which is like
That's right.
An awesome, awesome surprise to hear. It's so fantastic.
It's a funny connection.
We had Michal on the show, Michal Waltner-Levy, a few weeks back, and we had Amir Shvat as our first episode, and so I'm slowly building the Google
you're
Campus
crossing
team.
the names off your list. Exactly.
Take care. Thank you very much.
Bye. Thank you.